Good afternoon, Charlie McMurdie, 32 years law enforcement, working within Scotland Yard's sort of murder command and fraud squad and robbery squad, and latter part actually setting up our UK national cybercrime police capability, which has now moved into the National Crime Agency, which you've probably seen and heard some of the news stories about. And then followed that by seeing the other side of the coin with the last sort of 4 years, spending time at PwC, primarily building out their capability, but also working with industry when, breaches, when it all hits the fan. What I propose to do, and the question was about, is cyber crime, cyber security a real issue in relation to autonomous vehicles, is to go through, what's the state of the nation type stuff at the moment, what's actually happening, some of the war stories, some of the cases, and then perhaps, where the cyber threat might move towards specifically autonomous vehicles, which hopefully will flow nicely into more depth and detail provided by Lucy. So without further ado, you can't talk cyber without some stats. Stats have always been a bit of a bane for me because way back in 2005, 2006, trying to lobby and gain buy-in to build cyber capability, big issues. It wasn't reported, it wasn't talked about. If it was happening, it was pushed under the table. So we didn't have a scale of a problem. Now, there's so many different surveys and questionnaires, far more engagement with industry actually discussing, sharing intelligence, sharing threats. We've got national reporting taking place, and we've got global data sharing exchanges happening. So we've got a better picture on what's actually going on. Not a full picture, but a better picture. This is PwC's Global State of Information Survey that was carried out with some of the key findings on that. I won't go into all of those, but one in particular that did mention, there wasn't an awful lot, to be fair, around automation, but one of the concerns that was flagged up around automation within that global survey by sort of FTSE and chief execs was around loss of automation, loss of sensitive data. I think it's very hard, maybe a lot of organisations, companies, different sectors haven't got their head around what the true impact may be of large-scale attack on automated systems. We're not talking about physical harm here, we're talking about concerns with sensitive data. Maybe that's because GDPR is hot on the heels, next month coming in, so financial penalties and sanctions. One of the overriding themes, all these different surveys that take place, they all kind of just condense them into one for you. Common themes. 4 common themes come out of all of them, time and time again. Cybercrime has become far more sophisticated. We used to see cyber attacks a bit like the old-fashioned, ram raiders, crash through the door, steal what they could steal, and off they'd go. Now, far more sophisticated. They'll do the recces, they'll do the research, they'll look at open source intelligence, they'll come in through the pipeline, through the supply chain, they'll stay undetected for long periods of time, which ties in with one of the other key factors, long discovery time, because they want to get to the crown jewels, they want to steal those ill-gotten gains and spend them. They want to get your highly sensitive intellectual property and off they go. Most breaches now, responding to them, it's not, what happened, it's also, when did this happen? And probably that breach took place a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. You've seen, I'm sure, some of the stories in the press. Top target in Europe, a pinch of salt with that one, I think, as I've already mentioned, I think we're pretty good, better than some other countries, at sharing intelligence, sharing what's actually happening, sharing when we come under attack. And GDPR, we'll probably see far more of that. But also, top target in Europe, we're fairly sort of, digitally enabled, we're fairly wealthy. But speak to any cyber criminals, they love to attack the UK. And they not only love to attack the UK, they like to live and operate and spend their ill-gotten gains in the UK. If you're going to make a few £1 million out of attacking that company, then, you know, why not come to the UK and go down Kensington High Street and go shopping in Harrods and, you know, spend your ill-gotten gains. But the other key factor with that is they all like the UK banks. If you're stealing financial credentials, UK banks are really good, really slick, really fast, moving money around. And I'll touch on that with some of the couple of the case examples. Human failures. People are probably, time and time again, the weakest link with all cybercrime that takes place. That's down to, you know, the member of staff who clicks on that link or leaves, you know, that sensitive material on the train or befriends, unbeknownst to them, somebody purporting to be a mate of theirs turns out to be one of your competitors who then, you know, put them into the system, or dedicated sleepers. You know, someone with the mindset they want to gain employment in that organisation purely for the purpose of facilitating crime with their criminal gang externally. So fake legends, fake CVs, fake credentials, gain employment, and then support exchange and breaches that take place outside. Or even down to that consultant that goes in to work with that organisation. You know, do you know who they are, or disgruntled employee who's given access to the network? So loads of different aspects. Looking at people is always one of the key concerns and issues. So general sort of flavour, what sort of stuff is happening at the moment? Had to put the top left-hand one in because it's in the news day in, day out. We're all going to be attacked by the Russians. We already have been. Lots of denial of service attacks taking place. Ransomware. We used to see, you may recall, you know, ransomware was nice, simple, you know, you've been fined £50 for illegal downloading files or file sharing or something. Now, very sophisticated, big business, big organised crime, you know, nice business model, pay your money because we've locked down the whole organisation, your whole company will go under, everything ceases to a halt. But we'll give you a discount if you pay in the next 2 hours, or we'll give you a penalty if you don't pay in the next 2 hours, or perhaps we'll start releasing your data out into the wild. Tell the public that you have suffered a breach, and there you go, there's access to all that sensitive intellectual property or financial credentials. Or we'll start deleting things for you. So big business around ransomware. It's a great crime model for sort of looking at how they work and operate and the professional aspects that they bring into it. IoT, everything is now connected. You know, people traditionally look at their own building, their own, you know, if you think about your own house, locking your front door, windows, bolts. But, you know, burglars don't have to break through that door or window now because you're probably connected up somewhere further down the line. I won't go too much into that, moving on. But what's the impact? There's loads of regulations coming in, you know, fraud that takes place. Organisations, when they suffer a big attack, particularly if you look at, you know, retail organisations or banking organisations, what's the impact of this breach? You know, how much is this going to cost us? What's the issues around that? Time and time again with sort of more traditional cyber attacks, cyber breaches where they're stealing financial credentials or knocking over infrastructure so it won't work. It's the reputational damage that causes more harm than anything else. I think perhaps with, and I'll touch on it, you know, autonomous vehicles, it's not, reputational damage might be an issue, but, you know, you've got real life, real, you know, major disaster harm that potentially could take place if you knock that plane out of the sky or disable the sensors on that vehicle that causes it to drive off the edge of a cliff. So, you know, reputation is key, but there are some other factors to consider. I put this one in here, it interested me about which countries actually sort of in favour, polling around. They like the idea of automated vehicles or automated transport. Potentially you don't need to own a car anymore. You know, you just Alexa or Google, get my car outside, I want to go shopping, and, you know, once you've finished with it, off it goes. It's probably one of the most wasted resources that's out there. But also, as we've already heard from Marcus, you know, if you can't drive, you know, what's the opportunity? You don't need to drive anymore. Something pulls up and away you go. But it just interested me that, you know, you've got countries, high density populations that seem to be far more in favour, and perhaps some of the less wealthy communities, far more in favour of autonomous vehicles than perhaps their sort of European counterparts in there. Different sectors, automation. We've done over the years loads and loads of work either dealing with breaches and attacks that take place, or preferably working with different sectors to actually embed cybersecurity within their organisations before it all hits the fan and breaches and attacks actually happen. Lots within, manufacturing, big product lines and retail and what have you. I was quite surprised to see transportation and storage actually comes, it's not top of the pops around the jobs, the employees at risk once those processes are automated. Manufacturing is a fairly obvious one. Everything's now, push a button and the whole supply chain is all connected up and everything's automated without people interfering with, down to the shipping containers coming off the ship to the goods ending up on the shelves there. A lot of that is now automated. And so moving on, some of the challenges. I mentioned ransomware, and it is something that I think it's a great model, but when you look at the opportunities and think about, this is a home picture, but any environment, any organisation where the cyber criminals will be looking at how can we get in, how can we cause harm, how can we get on that network, how can we steal those goodies or find out what's going on. This is, we've done silly games with, the killer toaster. Or, the Secret Service will tell you about, well, if you want to kidnap that VP, then, remotely you can stop the lift on the 3rd floor, building control systems. Or you can monitor when the fridge door opens and the fridge door shuts, so, who's in there. Or then just pipe into that company's TV that's in the boardroom and listen to what's going on and find out, what the stock market's going to be doing next week. So, lots of stuff going on, and I think it's really useful. You can't, go out and arrest your way out of every cybercrime, cyber attack that happens. But those where people are investigated, arrested and prosecute, there is a great deal of learning to be had from some of them. So, who's doing these attacks? Is it, the hacktivists? Is it nation state? Is it organised crime? Is it insiders that I've already mentioned? So, cybercrime groups, and this was a phishing team, Russian-based, came over to the UK, most of the foot soldier part of it, and a real organised business model. These aren't, just people that bump into each other. They have their job description, they have their role, they have their functions that they perform. But thankfully, not all cyber criminals are as switched on or as smart as you may think. Thank heavens for, this likes of these guys who, they might be robbing the banks and stealing several millions from the banks, but ultimately there's a few foot soldiers who decide to post their ill-gotten gains and their happy pictures on social media. Gives law enforcement a helping hand occasionally. But, 210 cities were hit cash point machines, taking out millions from all these cash point machines in 10 hours. Gives you a flavour of the size of that criminal organisation and the sophistication behind it. Not everyone is as sophisticated as that. I mentioned getting stats and finding out the scale of the problem was a real issue when we were lobbying to get funding to set up national cyber capability in the UK. Thank heavens for the hacktivists, because hacktivists, when they attack organisations, knock over our financial infrastructure, these are the guys that knocked over PayPal, MasterCard, Amazon, under the payback attacks that took place way back when, around the Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks thing. They thought, freedom of speech. We don't like what they're doing, withdrawing payment around all that, so we'll just knock over those, target of the day. Tango down was their, buzzword for the operation. Yeah, we'll knock over PayPal. Tango down, we're making, making our voices be heard. But, you know, look at the age group of some of those youngsters. Not particularly sophisticated, not particularly clever, but just exploiting weaknesses within those organisations. And prosecutions supported by those organisations when these were put before the court to the tune of, you know, you've cost us millions and millions of pounds worth of harm. One splinter group from, they were, you know, the Anonymous, one of these sort of originals. That lad there is one of the splinter from that. He was sort of self-declared the techie guy, running, you know, a million node botnet, like, you know, tons of firepower at their will that they could use to attack or hack different organisations. And, you know, the thing that they put before the court, him and his cohorts, which caused us a bit of a headache, arresting them all at the same time. Bearing in mind, you know, these guys could be anywhere in the world. The infrastructure can be anywhere in the world. Stolen data anywhere in the world. So you need to coordinate everything coming down at the same time. Doing it just for laughs. That was their LulzSec. Laughs, just for the fun of it, we'll hack in, and that is your typical cyber criminal CV. It's almost, you know, if you want to move to the next echelon, they share intelligence. They share how they hacked into that organisation and this organisation. He was in the process and had brought down our Serious Organised Crime Agency, now the National Crime Agency, at the time that he was arrested. But, you know, some of the other targets there. And you think, you know, some of these organisations have pretty good, pretty solid security measures in place. Times are changing and far better security is now being put in place. This is slightly more of what people may think, you know, I mentioned the Russians, you know, big, serious organised crime type stuff. This gang, 20-odd of them, came to the UK, and again, a game plan, a strategy, a business model. They'd done their research, and it was all about taking over UK bank accounts. And that's either putting up, you know, fake websites, recruiting websites, approaching migrant workers, or, you know, just to gain control of bank accounts, and then offering up all these bank accounts that were now under their control to, in this instance, drug cartels. And at the time the strike went in for this, they were pushing through, or trying to push through 173 million through UK banks, because UK banks are really good, really fast, really slick at moving money. And, you know, a few million went through, support really close cooperation working with UK banks, lots of, you know, confidentiality in place, trusted relationships to allow time to put, you know, get all these guys under control, watching where the money flow was going out of the UK, over to Eastern Europe, but, you know, success there with convictions in place. So you don't need to be a mastermind to do cybercrime. It's pretty easy. You know, you can Google it, go on the internet, how do I commit a cybercrime? How do I set up rogue Wi-Fis? Find one of these cyber supermarkets. This was the largest cyber supermarket, if you like, dark market at the time. 8,000 members, 2,500 odd online at the time that we took this site out. And within that site, you go onto the Ghost Market site, and, you know, how do I make bombs? How do I make drugs? How do I evade law enforcement? How am I, you know, how can I professionalize my money laundering? I want to buy the likes of that attack tool, or I want to hire the latest ransomware kit because I've just been fired from my job, or I'm a disgruntled employee. I want to attack my organization. So, you know, nice and easy now. This is where I mentioned at the start, cybercrime has become far more sophisticated. It's far more blended. It's not ram raiders. They are far more professional than that. This was one of the last cases that I was involved in before leaving law enforcement. And this, I think, kind of demonstrates how the professional cyber criminals set up their own in-house teams, departments. And this was a whole reason was to social engineer individuals into UK banks, poor UK banks again, It's a good job they've got pretty good security and trusted groups and networks of intel and threat sharing in place. Social engineer people in and stick something like that, a little keyboard monitor on the back of the banking terminals, because, you know, the guys will go in, yeah, I'm here to see head of legal, I have an appointment at 1 o'clock, knowing head of legal, you know, their foot soldiers have just clocked him going out, or they're checked online, social profile is posted that he's off in, you know, Costa del Sol at the moment with the family and kids all over Facebook. So they'd recce, they'd know who was doing what, where, how. Social engineer in, stick these in, and then capture all the data that's going through those banks. And then, obviously, they want to have command and control. It's no good stealing Charlie McMurdie's bank account details and, you know, account number and what have you. They want my card in their hand. They want control of my account. So how do you then step change all that data so you can apply for a new card? You know, change your phone number, 5 minutes later, change your email, 5 minutes later, change, you know, there's my new home address, etc., etc. So that whole professionalised model, and it's all about gaining the cards. Once you've got the cards, off you go, down to Harrods, do a bit of shopping, or spend, you know, move the money around, transfer the funds. So where does all that tie in with autonomous vehicles? I think, hopefully, it's demonstrated there's those that do it because they can, and there are opportunities for those that do it because they can and, you know, that spend 22 hours a day just trying to have a go at certain things. There are several, you know, organised crime entities out there that will do it because they can see the opportunity, you know, a few fake crashes, stealing your personal data that's flowing through within, you know, vehicles, changing some sensors to create a few things, you know, tell the car, don't take Charlie home, or don't take Charlie to so-and-so, take her there, and, you know, kidnap, and all sorts of loads of opportunities for law enforcement to become very busy. But, you know, some of the key things that I think, I'm getting the wrap up quick, the different number of endpoints and the various data flows in and out of autonomous transport present real opportunities. The fact that this is all fairly new and you've got different manufacturers providing different bits of capability or different parts make it really difficult for cyber criminals to jump from one platform to another because there is that disconnect there. I'll skip over that one. It's on this one. You know, there's opportunity to harvest financial data potentially that is going to be hooked up to your autonomous vehicles. So when you're going through, you know, the toll gates or congestion charging, you know, you don't have to worry about paying that because your vehicle's all hooked up to that. I think it would be really good looking at where we are with cybercrime and how industry comes together to share threat intelligence, to share defensive capabilities, to look at, you know, what legal address have you got if you come under attack. Bearing in mind that attack on your autonomous capability or your roadside capability can come from anywhere in the world. I think there's an awful lot moving forwards that could be done and, you know, could be why reinvent the wheel, look at where we've actually had to think about some of those issues within, you know, the more traditional cybercrime environments. Thank you. Thank you for listening.